Hey folks, Ben Gilbert here with Engadget, and I'm back with Ludwig Kietzmann of Joystiq, and we are post-E3 Microsoft briefing, and now we know a lot more about the Xbox One's games and price and release window. So I guess just to kick things off, let's talk price, because that seems to be the biggest news, at least in my mind, because money is important to me.
Sure. I mean, that is not how they kicked the show off, but like it was very buried right at the end. It's like, oh, by the way, here's the price when buy.
It was definitely like a quick throw, and $500, $499, right?
Yep.
So that's about the PS3 launch price of the egregiously expensive PS3.
It was the price of the 20 gig model.
Remember right, that was the lower model for the PS3. And there aren't multiple models of this, so it's only $500 for all the. There's only one SKU, so to speak, and not only
for now. Yeah,
there's only one thing.
They may be subsidized pricing later down the line, but if you want to buy the system right now, you're going to spend $500, which is it's a lot of money.
So I thought that was especially interesting, though, that they didn't mention, like you said, the contracts or the subsidies or any way of people paying for it other ways, right?
That's complicating the message, though. At this point, like I think they kind of just want to sell it as a product that you go out and it's on the shelf and you buy it and you can start pre-ordering it right now.
And maybe that's something that they'll clarify during the show, right? Like maybe there are other options and we just don't know yet. That's always a possibility. But for me, I mean, $500 that's a really high barrier to entry, right? Like there were some really cool games. There's a new Halo. There's a new Respawn game. There's Rise. There's all these big exciting games. But $500 is I could buy a PC for that, right?
Well, you could buy a lot of things for that. I mean, I think you're probably getting pretty good value for $500 if you're comparing it to a PC, especially.
And it does come with a Kinect.
Especially if you're going to cut out the time that you would end up building your own PC, right? Like how valuable is your own time? Like I couldn't judge, for that purposes.
Sure.
But you really, it's the same launch problem every time. Like you have to weigh up, like what do you really want? What are you going to do on day one? And is it going to be worth the money? Like I think we knew it was going to be expensive. Anything in this current economy is, it's going to rub you the wrong way when you pay a lot of money for it. But they did a good job of coming out with games, games, right? That's what we were talking about earlier.
Did.
They started the demo with Metal Gear Solid 5. Like that is like instant gamer cred right there.
I was honestly surprised that they started with that, considering it's not an exclusive.
Sure.
So to be clear, Metal Gear Solid 5 is both the Phantom Pain and Ground Zeroes, right? So these are two separate games, right?
They are two separate games, yes.
They are two separate games, and they're both for Xbox One? Okay, so
but like one leads into the other, I think.
Right. I understand. They're all part of the same story. But to be clear, there are two separate games being released separately, all known as Metal Gear Solid 5.
Yeah, and so it was open world, and that was sort of a phrase that we heard a lot throughout the show, is open world, like bigger, like you can go anywhere, you can do all this stuff. So that's a completely open world stealth game, which seems really interesting.
And it was gorgeous.
Absolutely. And like we also saw Dead Rising 3, which sort of seems to be a dramatic improvement over the previous games, especially in terms of like how open it is and the combat mechanics. There's proper over-the-shoulder shooting now. And I think the other open world game that we saw, well, not open world, but you can make a world in Project Spark.
There's Project Spark, and there's also the Insomniac game. That looks like an open world game as well, right?
Sunset Overdrive.
Sunset Overdrive. It's like a parkour shooter thing. I don't really know how to describe it.
Very playful, like very cartoonish visuals, very colorful, very fast-paced it looked like.
It looked like it plays to Insomniac strengths.
There was a gun that shot records.
Yep.
So like, the old record player. It just seems like it was more like the creative, weapon-loving Insomniac that seems to have taken a back seat with Fuse. I think a lot of people were disappointed in that game, but they came out strong with this one. And it's funny because they used to be a Sony exclusive studio.
Right.
Now they're doing an Xbox One.
Phil Harrison used to be a Sony
How things
exclusive,
have changed.
And he's on stage.
Things just keep swapping around. It's hard to keep track of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So we named a bunch of games there, though, right? There's Rise, there's Metal Gear Solid 5.
Right. So Rise used to be
Overdrive.
the Kinect game. Rise used to be a Kinect-only game. Now it's a sort of a third-person action game with sort of very brutal combat, and you deflect with your shield, and it's set during Roman times, and you can command your army with
some
like
Kinect
minor
too,
Kinect
right?
integration.
Right.
Yeah, it runs on CryEngine 3, so it looks gorgeous. We didn't really get to see much of how that game sort of plays out on a level-by-level basis, but they also use it to demonstrate like a Smart Glass functionality.
Right.
So how people might share tips, or how you can look at other people's profiles playing the game. And there's cross-play matchmaking, so you can start matchmaking in one game, start playing something else over here, and it'll switch over when your matchmaking is ready on one game.
Which is really neat, right?
Killer Instinct, which is
apparently
like
being relaunched?
The legend that was like whispered so many times that eventually became true. I think that's what happened.
I can't imagine what that's like at Rare, right? Like half the studio is working on Kinect Sports whatever, and then the other half studio is working on Killer Instinct?
I think Double Helix is also working on it.
Is
so
it Double
it's a multi-studio game.
Understood. So yeah, there's those, and there's also Minecraft is coming to Xbox One with like a larger world and expanded multiplayer. And
that was like a misfire of that segment of the show. Like they went into like, see, we support indies. Here's Minecraft, which is its Notch has millions of dollars. I don't think he's quite in the same range of the sort of really minor small team games that they want to go after.
He's just one man, and he made the game by himself.
Sure,
right?
but that story has changed now. Like I think it was more interesting when they showed a Max and the Magic Marker sequel. I think it was called Max and the Curse of Brotherhood.
I think that's a sequel, right?
It was like a 2D platformer where you draw things on. That seemed really interesting.
Like a puzzle platformy game.
It's made by a studio in Denmark. And they also had a new game from Cappy and Jim Guthrie.
That was extremely exciting.
Below. It seemed really cool.
A roguelike, a dungeon crawler roguelike, and it looked gorgeous, right? Like that was beyond the game being from a studio that I like, and I like Super Brothers, and there's a pedigree there. Mm-hmm. There's also a visual aspect of that game that's really artistic and gorgeous, right? Like, and very different than everything else we saw today. Yeah. There's a lot of games where things look really visually stunning, but it's just because there's more stuff on screen, or there's more people, or there's more particle effects, or whatever else. But this was really something that just looked like they took the Xbox One hardware and made something really gorgeous out of it, instead of really, and not like extreme or hyper realistic, right? It's like really stylized.
It's not artistic. The kind of game that they'll say it really pushes the envelope of the 8 gigs of RAM in the system. Like they won't say stuff like that because it's really functioning independently of that stuff. But again, it isn't exclusive, so if you really want it, like you'll have to consider that. Mm-hmm. I also think Titanfall was a really impressive demonstration. I think a lot of people have been. I mean, they've been waiting to see what those Respawn guys do.
Right.
After the infamous split from the Call of Duty brand. And apparently it's mechs and a very large open world environment and extraordinary presentation values. I'm
a little on the fence about that game just because it looked. There were so many games that were so visually stunning today that by comparison, and perhaps this is unfair to the game just because they're doing more in terms of actual stuff in the environment or whatever else, right? There are other ways to make things visually stunning, but it didn't look as impressive to me as a lot of the other games.
I found myself drawn to like how quick it was, how mobile your character was. You can run on walls and you've got a jetpack for jumping. And there's an element of strategy, like you can choose a way to deploy your Titan, which is a mech.
Yep.
And you can sort of drop it in and sort of turn the tide of, the course of battle. Mm-hmm. And when it's about to explode, you have to eject. And what I liked was it's really seamless. Like you fly out of the mech, and you can still keep on shooting, and you can hijack another mech.
That was especially cool. Like, they jumped out of the mech onto another mech.
In terms of multiplayer gameplay, that'll be really fun. Like it'll be a perfect thing that you sort of, wind down with.
And it certainly seems like they're focusing on multiplayer, stuff. Right? Like the multiplayer that they showed off today, there's probably a single-player component to the game, but it seems like multiplayer is clearly the thrust there if they're starting with that. Mm-hmm. And that makes a lot of sense, given the, like you said, the background with Call of Duty and everything else with Respawn Entertainment. And that was their one more thing, right? Like that was their last minute, like, oh, also, here's our big exclusive. So,
we saw a trailer for the new Halo, which is actually a really nice trailer because it was surprising. Like we didn't expect it to be. Like, they didn't just sort of walk Master Chief right out the bat.
No, right.
What's interesting is they're not calling it Halo 5 yet. Like, it's just called Halo.
Right.
So, I mean,
it's the next-gen Halo title.
Right, and that's coming
in... It's a 343 game.
That's coming in 2014, and, like, they explicitly dropped this bit of info, knowing who was paying attention. It's going to run at 60 frames a second, which is the first time a Halo game has ever done that.
So I've played a lot of Halo multiplayer.
Versions.
I know you play a lot of Halo multiplayer. Yes. Can you explain why that matters to me?
So 60 frames per second means that the animation is being updated more frequently, which means that the time between there being a reaction in the game and you pressing a button is lowered. So responsiveness will be a lot better. Animation looks smoother. The movement in general is smoother. Comparing to, like, look at Call of Duty versus Battlefield on consoles. Like, there's a very distinct difference in feel. And that is what the frame rate translates to.
I think that my worry is that when I consider 60 frames per second, I always think of things that are more Twitch-based, right? Like Call of Duty is a pretty Twitch-based game, and it requires that level of precision, whereas Halo is a floatier, slower, more tactical game.
I mean, I would say it's certainly not essential, but like it will feel better. Like it'll feel smoother, and animation, especially facial animation, looks much better at 60 frames a second.
Okay.
If you play like the current crop of console games on PC, you can really see the advantages of that. So it's nice to see that they're shooting for high resolution and high frame rate, because that's really a usability issue. Like a lot of people don't have the vocabulary to talk about things like frame rate. They might not pick it up. They might say this game feels different, but they don't know.
Sure.
Why. So it's good that they dropped that lexicon, because this is the show that was aimed at hardcore gamers.
Okay, so what else excited you from the press conference, right? Like, they didn't really talk Xbox Live that much. They talked about how gold accounts can be shared. They talked about...
Microsoft points are out.
Microsoft points are out. They didn't really talk about something that I think is especially interesting is like the kind of separation between smaller digital titles and the bigger retail releases. And this is something we talked about a little bit before the show with regards to them not really differentiating necessarily between those things. And it seems like that is the case, right? Like they didn't. There was no point they said Xbox Live Arcade. They talked about Minecraft. They talk about the smaller stuff like the Belows or the Max and the. What is the name of that game?
Max and the Curse of Brotherhood.
Curse of Brotherhood, right. So they talked about these games that look like smaller titles, but aren't necessarily known as like Xbox Live Arcade games. And that's really interesting to me because I think I separate those a little bit, psychologically. And I wonder how that will impact how those games do, Please excuse the sirens going by. Got a live show on a street in Los Angeles, so we're doing our best here.
Well, it's the way that people separate games in their mind in terms of like whether they downloaded them or whether they bought them on disc. Like people understand, okay, my disc-based games are not compatible with Xbox One, but why aren't my arcade games? And it's like, but they're all Xbox 360 games. It's just like the way that it was distributed, that's the difference.
Right.
And it's not the disc that's keeping the Xbox One from playing your games. It's the architecture, right? So that's like sort of something that they really need to educate people about, I think. Like at least help them sort of understand why it's upsetting that you don't have. I mean, I think you should have backwards compatibility. Like PCs have it for years now. Like you don't have to worry about something not working on your proprietary hardware years down the line. So that is something that a lot of people will be upset about and thinking about when they consider whether or not to spend $500 on it.
Absolutely.
But this is when the TV stuff comes back in, because like there is an attempt at offering value, even if you are losing a lot of control over your ownership of games. And some people will be okay with that. Some people won't be okay with that. It really depends on how you interact with games.
It's really strange because I've been having some conversations with folks about this kind of. There's a lot of attachment, I think, to physical media, right?
For sure.
And
it's
like
how it
physically
worked
owning
for years
something.
and years.
And I definitely understand that, but I also live in a relatively restrictive space, and as a result, I'm pretty averse to keeping media in my house, right? Like I love film and television and games and lots of stuff, but I don't want to keep DVD boxes in my apartment,
It's all about how you consume it, right?
Sure.
Like if you just like sort of blast through it, move on to the next thing, know that you're not going to have time to come back to something, that you don't need to own it, that's a different way of looking at it. Not everyone shares that opinion. But
yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that they didn't mention used games at all during this whole thing.
Why would you? Like they already had a bad news bomb at the end, which is $500.
And they slipped it in. They threw it out there. So November, $500. And they didn't give a solid date. It's going to be also €499, which is, I don't understand how that works.
£420.
And £429, something like that.
Yeah.
Somewhere around thereabouts. So it's about the same price worldwide, and it's a November launch. They said
21 markets.
21 markets, right. So I don't know what that means in terms of...
Well, it means they're shooting for a worldwide-ish launch.
Right.
I don't know what that says about supply, though.
Right. And the other big surprise was a new Xbox 360. I was surprised. You don't look surprised. You look nonplussed.
I mean, that was over so quickly. It wasn't a blip. It was like, here's a new Xbox 360. They announced new Xbox 360 games, but I mean, that's not why we're here to talk about.
They did announce a bunch of new Xbox 360 games. That was a surprisingly large push during this event, actually, with Xbox 360 titles.
It's good. I think it's important for them to show that continuity, which they did not have with the original Xbox.
No, they dropped the old Xbox like a bad habit.
Bye.
Yeah, they immediately got rid of it. Yeah. So, anyway, so that's I think what we've got from the show so far. We will be interviewing Microsoft executives and talking to studios on the show floor.
You can find out about that Swery 65 game.
Yeah, there's that Swery 65 game they showed for
called
2 seconds.
D4. Yeah, they got Swery 65 to do an Xbox exclusive.
So hopefully we'll find out lots more details about the Xbox One as the week goes on, and we hope you'll join us at both Engadget and Joystiq.
Yep. Thanks.
Thanks, folks.